One of the things I'm going to be doing while I'm here is building my parents a new computer. So you have the Gigabyte Ultra Durable Black Edition motherboard with the Z97 chipset. We got a Corei7 i7-4790. We got our Samsung 840 Pro 128 gig SSD. We have 8 gigs of DDR3 2400. We have a Gigabyte Edition GeForce GTX 770. 4 gigs of video RAM. So this will be fun. And a Corsair CX 750 watt power supply to go with it. We're not changing the case. And I will be leaving the Pentium 4 sticker. So let's start taking things apart. Alright, so now we're going to tear out the old components.
That's crazy.
Now, originally this machine was a Pentium 4 Northwood, and then a few years back my brother swapped his AMD machine into it. And the motherboard and stuff actually isn't that bad. Graphics card's just a little slow. But we're going to go with a full upgrade anyway. So I think this only takes DDR2. Yeah. And the difference between DDR2 and DDR3 is double the bandwidth, which really helps in this case because my dad in particular, likes to play video games, so, well, Flight Simulator. This is actually overkill for Flight Simulator, but the idea is that you could just spend about $1,500 once and then they don't have to upgrade for 10 years.
Dating someone, aren't you? What's her name?
Look, Maddie, go home.
How many different screws do you need to use?
I'm just gonna use a few.
Apparently.
Just tell me, are you gonna help me? Yes or no?
I'm sorry. The answer's no. Maybe when you decide to turn your life
I should have known I couldn't count on you. Next time you need help, I'll remember this.
Oh, when I need help. What have you ever done to help me? You sure as hell weren't there when Dad died. You were out getting wasted every night while I sat there by his bed making up excuses for you about why you didn't want to spend the last months of his life with him. Oh, what a surprise, Claire. Everybody else is a fault except for you. Dad didn't know us and you were too busy feeling sorry for yourself and waiting for him.
Well, you're right, Claudia. I couldn't just stand by and watch that waste.
It's actually a pretty nice little machine. I think I might keep that. And we're going to get rid of the power supply.
Hey, Claudia. What happened? I'm sorry. I bumped the table and it broke.
Here, I'll take that. It's okay.
Thanks. You can cry?
Claudia, can you help me go check my emails before bed?
Sure. Let's make it quick, okay?
Okay. Bye, Mom. Bye,
Have
Claudia.
a good day.
I'll call you when I get here.
Okay. Oh, that's right. What is this? Chinese puzzle box?
Last night, you could have let us out of breaking our phones. I'm okay. Much better today. Because if you need time, even now we can manage on our own. Thanks. I'm alright though.
Pull all these.
You're going for lunch with Claudia? Yeah, I'm leaving in 2 minutes. What's that?
I don't know. It just got delivered.
Says it's from Maddie.
Alright, so we're keeping the old hard drive in here as a secondary storage drive. We're keeping the DVD drive.
That's just all there is to it.
I agree.
We're keeping the card reader, even though I'm not sure it really works. So I'm gonna go blow this thing up. Alright, haven't dusted the case out yet, but let's crack the lid on this. Oh yeah, look at that. Now, when picking this out, I got the motherboard and processor as a deal on Newegg, got a little bit off. You had 3, maybe 4 motherboards to choose from. I eliminated one straight away, and I must have sat there for half an hour looking at the way that the motherboards were laid out and they were designed. And when I saw this ultra durable at first, it kind of steered me away. You know, you shouldn't have to advertise that your product is durable. You should design it that well to begin with, right? So after careful deliberation, looking at component placement, brands of capacitors, how much heatsink area there was for the chipset and the voltage regulators compared to other motherboards, this one actually came out on top. I think this was a very well thought out design. It still had a couple of drawbacks, like I wish it had more USB ports. We'll get into that when I show you the back panel I/O on this guy. So let's open this up.
What can I do for you?
This is quite the fancy box.
Right?
Oh yeah, look at that. Stickers. I'll be stealing those. Oh yeah. New electronic smell. Okay, so here's the motherboard completely removed from the box, and so back here we have 8 USB ports, 4 USB 2, 2 USB 3, and then we have like VGA, DVI, and HDMI. I mean, you can pick one here. I probably would have went with the DVI, because then you can have analog outputs in the DVI to convert it to VGA, and you have digital outputs on the DVI to convert it to HDMI, so you can drive both analog and digital. And if you did the dual link DVI connector, you could drive a super high resolution monitor. So personally, I probably would have went with the DVI, but whatever. Still have legacy keyboard and mouse, which is kind of silly. And we get one regular PCI slot, 32-bit PCI slot. But when we get to the chipset itself here, you can see that the heatsink on this is actually pretty good. The other ones, it was like just a square piece of aluminum or a round piece of aluminum stuck on there. It didn't really have any fins. You gotta have that surface area to dissipate the heat. I mean, it's not like I'm gonna water cool this, right? So the same with the voltage regulator heat sinks. You can tell here that there's a significant amount of surface area in the heatsink design. But one drawback I immediately see to this is, I mean, look at that. I don't know, that just doesn't seem all that great to me. But as long as the thermal pad doesn't break down, then it should be okay. I think that could have been better done though. You got your SATA and everything pointing out the front panel stuff, all kinds of front panel stuff. So this is going to be sweet. All right, let's open the power supply box. Do a little unboxing here. Now I did go with the modular power supply on this. I prefer the modular power supplies; they're cleaner. Warranty, safety information. Yeah. here's all our cables. IEC power cord for those who don't have 10 million of them. I got power and gum. No, don't eat that. Well, I'm hoping it mounts this way. It's going to end up pulling air from inside the case. We'll deal with that accordingly. Even though it is modular, the main motherboard connector, and it looks like the additional 8-pin 12-volt, or a single additional 8-pin 12-volt power is available, then that's the CPU, so I imagine that plugs directly into the motherboard. And we will be using that. And then we get looks like we get a couple of PCI Express ones and then peripheral and SATA. So we'll actually open this up and see what cables we get. I decided to go with 750 watts on this build because we're only ever going to run one graphics card. If it was two, I'd probably go a kilowatt, which would almost be overkill still anyway. That is a-okay. Cool. I heard the air compressor go off, so we can finally dust out the case. We will mount the power supply first, and then we will get our motherboard on. So I got our power supply in, and I'm installing this back panel I/O shield, as you can see here. And I'm actually really impressed with the quality of this. As you can see, it's got conductive material here with foam that actually mates up. So not only is it kind of an airtight seal, but it protects against EMI really well. So pretty impressive. Alright, so I'm setting this motherboard in here for the first time, and the screw holes end up different. I imagine this is because there was a mini ATX in here before, or micro ATX or whatever, so I gotta move it down there. Not really a big deal, just if you install this board, be sure you check your layout if you're putting it into a used case, or even a new one. Don't assume. Okay, so we got our SATA cables hooked up. The Samsung SSD is installed. Only one screw holds it in, but it's actually really tight. It's not going to come loose. If it is, I'll just drill a second hole and that'll be that. And we got our other hard drive here. So the SSD I put on, gave it its own channel. Like there's a separate little SATA header here with 0 and 1 on it. So 0 and 1 I usually leave because, you know, we might add a second SSD and RAID them. And for some reason, sometimes if you have a slow SATA drive, you know, it might knock down both channels to the slower bandwidth. Probably not in this case, and this is a pretty nice board, but we're just going to prevent any potential problems. And 0 is the SSD, 1 is free, channel 2 is this hard drive, and channel 3 is that CD drive. So that's how that's organized. I haven't hooked up the power cables to anything, but the front panel is done, along with front panel USB, and the front panel audio is hooked up, which is something that I don't think we've ever done on this computer before. But yeah, now you can plug headphones in. So we're going to install the processor next, and the RAM and the video card, and then we will be down to routing power. Oh yeah, sexy. i7 4790, 3.6 gigahertz. And Bill, if you were here, you would just pitch this thing straight in the trash can. I wish I could, but I only got this cooler. We're not overclocking it, so theoretically the stock cooler would be ideal. But I mean, really? Could you make it like a little thicker, please? Oh well.
I'm sorry, I should have just told you the truth.
Look at that. So much sex.
Just random stuff. stuff. At first I thought it was because he was kind of into you, but I didn't think much of it because he backed off.
Install your processor first, then remove and keep the cover. Oh yeah.
One biologic medicine
Processor is installed.
can help you stop joint damage.
And when you're putting the cover down and depressing the lever, you do leave this cover on. It kind of helps align things, and it also protects it. You don't really want to touch the top of the processor or avoid it as much as possible because the oils from your fingers kind of act as thermal insulation, you could think of it as. So now I'm ready to put the cooler on and move on from there. Okay, processor is installed. We're ready to install the cooler. Now when flipping the cover down, you actually do leave this protective black plastic cover on there. It helps keep things aligned as you close the cover. And the other thing is it keeps your fingers from touching the top of it. It's kind of important that you don't touch the top of that because the oils from your fingers can kind of act as insulation, and then it won't be as sufficient for the thermal compound. You can clean it off with alcohol if you do end up touching the processor, but now it's completely factory fresh, and we already have our goo on here, so I'm just going to go ahead and plop this in, and then we'll be ready for the RAM and the graphics. Okay, we got the RAM installed. And remember, when installing RAM, if you're just installing 2 sticks and you're going to have like 2 more slots available or whatever, that you install them into the first 2 slots. And you can't just assume that the adjacent slot is the second slot. Now in this case they kind of made it easy and they color coded them, but it's not always that apparent. And so in this case, the alternate spacing, I actually prefer this because when you have just 2 sticks, so you know, in our case 8 gigs of RAM, there's this 16 gigs.
I think you should go to the police with this.
Either way, because the RAM is spaced like this, it allows airflow, you know, to happen in between here. Keeps things running smoothly. So that's in, the cooler's in. Now I thought it was pretty trick that they had the header up here where you could use the factory cable ties in the fan to run it around, and then you could plug it in. You don't have this extra cable. But actually it ended up being short because they put 2 headers here, CPU optional and then CPU fan is the top one. It actually reached to the optional one, but fan is the one that I wanted to plug it into, so it was correctly labeled. And I guess I could have turned this or whatever, but I wanted the Intel logo to face straight up. OCD, go figure. So I just routed the cabling this way, and it looks clean, it's out of the way. I could have pulled it tight the other way, but the blade edges started getting pretty close to it, and I wasn't the happiest with that, so this way will work much better. So here's the finished computer. I apologize in advance for the piss poor lighting conditions. But here's everything. I changed out the front case fan, the rear case fan. It's hooked up to the motherboard along with the front. This is the only card that we're putting in here. I don't have any card blanks to go in there, but we'll get that taken care of. I decided to flip this case fan around because the big 140 that's up in the power supply, maybe that might even be bigger than that, but the big fan in the power supply pulls air from inside the case and kicks it out. So I figure it'd probably be easier to go with like a kind of a positive pressure setup in the rest of the case. So this fan points in, the fan back there points in and blows directly across the SSD, so we won't have to worry about the SSD overheating. And then that air carries over to the graphics card, which has its own ridiculous air cooling. So this thing's going to get choked full of dust pretty quickly, but it should stay cool. Stupid stock cooler. And then you can see cable management isn't too horrible. I mean, it's going to just be a workhorse, more or less. It's not supposed to be fancy, but things are kind of zip tied and generally well kept until you get up here when there's a crap ton of extra cable. which I just kind of stuffed up there. I did zip tie most of it. So when I ran these cables, I made sure that none of these heat sinks were stressed in a way, because remember, they move easy. Oh, you can't really see it, but they move easy. So you don't want anything resting up against those heat sinks that might cause them to shift positions and be uneven. And the graphics card clears that back heatsink just fine. At least the case fan in the front there blows directly across it, so that's pretty cool. And then as far as this fan goes, there's actually a vent in the side of the case that will funnel air directly down to here. Alright, here we are in post. The system set up. I had to go back and set up the RAM by hand. It didn't want to push it to 2.4 gigahertz. But that's no big deal, because as you can see, we are there now. So there's that, 50 degrees with the stock cooler. And even though the fans are the 3-pin fans instead of the 4-pin fans, the motherboard supports PWM control of those fans as well, regardless of whether or not they're 3 or 4-pin. So I actually set up the temperature profile as far as ramping the PWM to be a lot more aggressive than stock. I prefer it that way. They're probably not going to dust out the computer as often as I would like them to, so better to be safe than sorry. I've set temperature warning protections and shutdown and stuff like that, so we're pretty much there. I haven't actually tried to boot it off the existing hard drive. So right now the SSD is blank, and the hard drive from the old setup is still in there, so okay, let's boot Windows 7 from the old hard drive and see what happens. It's going to be slightly confused, I think. Yep, slightly confused. I figured that, you know, you gotta reinstall Windows anyway, it's a fresh computer, but it's hilarious to try things sometimes. So, yeah, it's not gonna do its thing. Although that loaded pretty fast. We'll try to start up repair and see what happens. I guess I'll let you know if I get anywhere. So I'm just going to let it run this, burning the memory all night. I just threw memtest on a USB stick, booted it to it. I don't have my CDs here, so I actually got to pull my Windows ISO image from my server, burn it to a CD, and then I can install Windows. So for now, it's going to do this. Okay, it's been a couple days since the computer was built. I have installed all the software, and I've even edited a couple videos on it. The machine works great. The factory heatsink that came with the Corei7 CPU was horrible. I had to disable the Intel Turbo Boost. I noticed that when I was rendering video and the CPU was taxed, it was 190 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere in the 190 range, much too hot for my liking. Once I disabled the Turbo Boost, I even underclocked it by 100 megahertz, and that resolved the problem. And I eventually went back to the stock clock speed, but just with Turbo Boost disabled. Under 100% CPU load for an extended period of time, it gets to about 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Once again, probably a little more than I would like, but that's going to suffice for now. The next time I come back out here, we will actually order a nice aftermarket cooler and go ahead and throw it in. If any of you have suggestions of a middle-of-the-range air CPU cooler that's you know, good value for the money. We don't need anything extravagant. We're not really overclocking it. So yeah, let me know what you have. And I figured that it wouldn't be a complete video without a cold boot. So I'm going to hit the power button. We're going to see just how long it takes to start up. And we're there. And as you can see, our system tray is loaded, and it is a fully usable system. And for those of you wondering where we land on the Windows Experience Index, which really means nothing, I guess. But and if I click on it, the processor has the lowest score. So now I'm going to throw this into my video editing software and go ahead and post this on YouTube. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. Hit the comment box. Hit my website, doogielabs.com. And until next time, take it easy. So I hope you enjoyed this computer build. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. Hit the comment buttons. Hit the comment buttons. You know, those buttons for comments.
Well, that's a big deal.